At this exact moment, your biological body is recreating the same financial barrier, the same conflicts, or the same paralyzing anguish from 5 years ago, even if you study the laws of the universe and cleanse your energy every single day. You're exhausted from swimming against this current and seeing that in practice the matter around you remains stuck. There is a glass ceiling. But what would happen if you discovered that you're not trapped because you're doing a spiritual technique wrong, but because you're protecting the one mental file that the machinery of this universe requires to keep you exactly where you are? Right now, without noticing, your system is prioritizing one specific memory, one story that still carries emotional weight. Not all of your past, just one key piece that keeps replaying in the background, shaping your reactions, your decisions, and what you believe is possible. And as long as that file stays active, your reality keeps organizing around it. This is not about effort, it's about what you refuse to release. You know that horrible feeling of taking 3 steps forward in life, waking up feeling like everything is finally going to move, and suddenly, a single trigger or memory pulls you 10 steps back. This isn't a lack of faith or a spiritual blockage, it's pure mathematics. The physical universe doesn't obey what you want, it reads your electromagnetic signature. And the heaviest magnetic weight draining your life right now is a very specific story you refuse to let go of. Think about how quickly it happens. You can be having a normal day, even a good one, and then something small, a phrase, a face, a smell, a notification, touches that old memory. And instantly, your entire internal state shifts. Your posture changes, your breathing tightens, your thoughts narrow. It feels like you've been pulled into a different version of reality without your permission. But here's the part most people miss. That shift is not just emotional, it's measurable. Your body begins broadcasting a different signal the moment that memory takes over. Your heart rhythm changes, your brain waves reorganize, your nervous system moves into a familiar pattern it has practiced many times before. You are no longer reacting to the present, you are reactivating a stored pattern, and your body is transmitting it like a radio tower. The universe doesn't interpret your intentions the way you think it does. It doesn't say, they want abundance, or they want peace. It reads the signal you are actually emitting in that moment. And if that signal is shaped by a past experience, especially one loaded with strong emotion, it carries a density that outweighs your conscious desires. That's why effort alone feels so frustrating. You can repeat affirmations, visualize a better future, try to stay positive, but if there is one unresolved story sitting deeper in your system, it acts like a magnet pulling everything back into alignment with itself. Not because you're doing something wrong, but because that story has more charge than the future you're trying to create. And it's not random. It's always specific. It's not your past as a whole. It's not every mistake or every memory. It's 1 or 2 key moments that defined how you see yourself, how you interpret others, or what you believe is possible for you. These moments became reference points. Your system keeps checking back with them, like coordinates. You might not even think about them consciously every day, but your body remembers. And your body doesn't need words to recreate an experience. It just needs the pattern. So when something in your environment resembles even a small piece of that old situation, your system reacts as if it's happening again. And in that moment, your signal matches your past more than your present. The result? Your external reality reorganizes itself around that signal. This is why progress can feel unstable. It's not that you're incapable of moving forward. It's that your system keeps getting pulled back to a familiar frequency, like a compass that refuses to point anywhere else. And the more emotionally intense that original story was, the stronger its pull becomes. Not because it's important in a logical sense, but because it was deeply encoded. Your system marked it as something to remember, something to prioritize, something to not let go of. So even when you think you've moved on, part of you is still guarding it, still referencing it, still broadcasting it. And as long as that broadcast continues, your reality has a consistent instruction to recreate conditions that match it. This is where things get uncomfortable, because it challenges a belief many people hold on to, that they are stuck because of something outside of them. But if you look closely, you'll see a pattern, the same type of conflict, the same kind of limitation, the same emotional tone repeating in different forms. Different faces, same feeling. Different situations, same outcome. It's not coincidence, it's coherence. Your system is simply staying loyal to a signal it knows very well. And once you see that, a deeper question starts to emerge. Not about the world, but about you. Not about what you want, but about what you keep replaying without realizing it. Because if your body is acting like the past is still happening, then your entire system is being trained to depend on that state. And what feels like being pulled back might actually be something much more subtle and much more powerful than just a memory. There is a silent mistake that the overwhelming majority of people seeking evolution make every single day. It's a practice they told you was necessary for freedom, but in reality, it's locking your life from the outside and throwing away the key. I'm going to reveal what that mistake is and what you must do to turn it off. But first, you need to understand what your own brain is doing to your cells right now. You were taught that to grow, you need to revisit your past, to analyze it, to understand it, to give it meaning. So you sit with your memories, you replay conversations, you go back to the moment things broke, trying to find clarity, closure, or some hidden lesson that will finally set you free. It feels responsible, it feels mature, it even feels necessary. But something strange keeps happening. The more you revisit those moments, the more alive they feel, the more detailed they become, the more your body reacts as if it's happening again right now. And instead of feeling lighter, you often end up feeling heavier, more entangled, more defined by what you were trying to release. This is the mistake. You believe you are processing the past, but in reality, you are rehearsing it. Your brain does not separate real experience from vividly remembered experience in the way you think it does. When you mentally step back into a painful event, your brain activates similar neural pathways as if the event were happening again. Your body follows that signal. It releases the same stress chemicals, tightens the same muscles, reinforces the same internal posture. So every time you work on your past by reliving it emotionally, you are not dissolving it, you are strengthening its wiring. And because your system is designed to adapt, it starts to expect this pattern. It becomes familiar, predictable, even comfortable in a strange way. Not because it feels good, but because it feels known. That's why people can spend years healing and still feel stuck in the same emotional loops. They're not failing, they're being consistent, just in the wrong direction. And here's where it becomes even more subtle. The identity you build around that process starts to solidify. You become the person who is working through something, the one who is on a healing journey, the one who carries a complex story that needs time and attention. And without realizing it, your sense of self becomes tied to the continuation of that process. If the story fully dissolves, who are you then? So part of you keeps it alive, not consciously, not intentionally, but functionally. This is why simply understanding your past doesn't free you. You can explain it perfectly, see every angle, even forgive the people involved, and still feel the same emotional weight in your body. Because the issue was never a lack of intellectual clarity. It was the repeated activation of a pattern. And every activation sends a signal. Every signal reinforces a state. Every state shapes what you experience next. So while you believe you are moving forward, your system is quietly anchoring itself to something behind you. Now here's the uncomfortable truth. The system you're in doesn't require you to understand your past in order to release it. It doesn't even require you to resolve it in the way you've been taught. What it responds to is much simpler and much more direct. It responds to what you repeatedly embody. If you keep embodying the emotional signature of your past, even in the name of healing, then from the outside, nothing changes. Because your signal hasn't changed. And this is why so many people feel exhausted. Not because growth is hard, but because they are unknowingly running in circles, investing energy into a process that feeds the very thing they want to escape. At some point, a different kind of question has to emerge. Not, why did this happen to me, or what does this mean, but something far more disruptive. What if going back is the very thing keeping it alive? Because if your brain is continuously sending the same signals to your body, and your body is continuously reinforcing the same state, then what you're dealing with is no longer just a memory, it's a chemical loop. And once you see that clearly, the entire game changes, not at the level of philosophy, but at the level of biology. For modern physics and your neural network, linear time is an illusion. Every time you mentally relive that pain, that injustice, or that grief that has already passed, your brain doesn't know it's just a memory. It floods your bloodstream with the exact chemistry of that day. Your biological body becomes addicted to the hormones of past suffering. You want a new future, but your biology is desperately demanding the chemistry of your past. This is not poetic language, it's mechanical. When a strong emotional event happens, your brain and body create a very specific chemical signature. Stress hormones rise, certain neural circuits fire together, your body shifts into a state of alert or defense. That combination gets recorded, not just as a thought, but as a full-body experience. Now here's where it changes everything. Your body starts to recognize that chemical state as familiar. And anything familiar, your system tends to return to. So even when the original event is gone, your body keeps looking for ways to recreate that same internal state. Sometimes through thoughts, sometimes through reactions, sometimes by pulling your attention back to the same type of memories. It's like your system is saying, this is what we know. This is what we've practiced. Let's stay here. And over time, that state becomes your baseline. You might call it anxiety, or frustration, or sadness, but beneath the label, it's a chemical pattern your body has learned to maintain. And because it's been repeated so many times, your system starts to depend on it. That's the part most people don't see. You think you're trying to escape your past, but a deeper layer of your body is actually craving it. Not the event itself, but the chemistry it produced, the intensity, the familiarity, the identity that came with it. So when your external life starts to become calm or open or different, something strange can happen. Instead of relief, you feel restless, uncomfortable, even uneasy for no clear reason. That's not failure, that's withdrawal. Your body is no longer getting the same chemical signals it's used to, and it doesn't know how to stabilize without them yet. So it looks for a way to recreate the old state. It might bring up a memory out of nowhere. It might lead you to overthink something small until it feels heavy. It might even pull you into situations or conversations that mirror your past patterns. Not because you want to suffer, but because your system is trying to return to what it recognizes as normal. This is why change feels so difficult, even when you genuinely want it. You're not just changing your thoughts, you're interrupting a chemical habit that your body has practiced for years, and your body resists that. Not intelligently, not consciously, just automatically. If you've ever noticed yourself thinking about something painful without choosing to, or reacting more strongly than the situation requires, that's not weakness, that's conditioning. Your system is firing a program it has run many times before, and every time that program runs, it reinforces itself. The neural pathways become easier to activate. The chemical release becomes more predictable. The identity connected to that state becomes more stable. So the loop tightens. Thought triggers chemistry. Chemistry reinforces feeling. Feeling validates the thought, and around it goes again and again until it feels like, this is just who I am. But it isn't who you are. It's what your system has memorized. And the moment you begin to see it this way, not as a personal flaw, not as a deep mystery, but as a repeated biological loop, you gain a different kind of leverage. Because if it's a loop, it can be interrupted. Not by fighting it, not by diving deeper into it, but by changing how you relate to it in real time. That's where everything starts to shift. Because the next time that familiar wave rises, the memory, the emotion, the pull, you're standing at a very precise point of choice. Not a dramatic choice, not a loud one, but a subtle and powerful one. You can either feed the chemistry, or you can cut the signal that keeps it alive. To interrupt this energy leak right now, you need a mechanical cut. When that old memory tries to invade your mind today, don't fight it and don't cry. Just breathe. Look at the scene as if it were a documentary on TV about a stranger, and say mentally, this is just a package of dead information. Without emotion, which is the electrical charge, the memory loses its magnetic force. You just cut the power line of that event. At first, this will feel unnatural, almost cold. Part of you will resist, because you've been trained to believe that emotions must be fully expressed, explored, and honored in order to be released. But what you're doing here is not suppression. You're not pushing the memory away. You're allowing it to appear, just without feeding it. There's a difference. Before, when the memory showed up, it would immediately pull you into it. Your body would follow, your emotions would rise, and within seconds you were no longer observing the memory. You were inside it again. Now, you're creating distance, not by force, but by perspective. You're seeing it instead of becoming it. And that small shift changes everything. Because the moment you stop supplying emotional energy, the loop begins to weaken. The brain may still present the image, the body may still start to react, but without your participation, the intensity has nowhere to go. It starts to fade, like a fire that no longer receives oxygen. This is the first real break in the pattern. Not dramatic, not explosive, quiet, almost invisible, but precise. You might notice something subtle in your body when you do this correctly. A pause, a slight confusion in your system. It's as if your internal machinery expected a familiar reaction, and when it didn't get it, it hesitated. That hesitation is important. It means the automatic program was interrupted, and the more times you create that interruption, the less stable the old pattern becomes. Not because you erased it, but because you stopped reinforcing it. Now, here's where you need to be honest with yourself, because this is where many people slip without realizing it. There's a hidden attachment to the emotional charge of your past. Even if it hurts, even if you say you're tired of it, there's still a part of you that identifies with that intensity. It gives your story weight. It gives your identity definition. So when you remove the emotion, the memory can feel empty, flat, almost meaningless, and that can be uncomfortable in a different way. Because if that memory loses its charge, it also loses its role in defining who you are. And for a moment, you're left without that reference point. This is why some people unconsciously reattach to the emotion. They revisit the memory and add feeling back into it, just to restore that sense of familiarity. So as you practice this cut, watch carefully. Are you truly observing the memory without charge, or are you subtly feeding it again? It can be very quiet. A small tension in your chest, a slight tightening in your thoughts, a quiet agreement with the old story. That's enough to keep the circuit alive. This is not about perfection. The memory may still come back many times. The body may still react. That's normal. What matters is what you do in the moment you notice it. Each time you choose to see it as dead information, you're sending a new signal to your system. You're teaching your brain and body that this pattern no longer needs to run. And over time, something begins to shift. The memory loses urgency. The emotional spike softens. The trigger weakens, not because you forced it, but because you stopped energizing it. But there's another layer you need to understand, because this process doesn't exist in isolation. When you begin cutting the emotional charge from your past, you're not just changing your inner state, you're also destabilizing the structure that has been built around it. And that structure doesn't disappear quietly. If the pattern has been running long enough, it has already shaped parts of your external life, your relationships, your decisions, even the opportunities you notice or ignore. So when you start removing the internal signal, there can be a kind of pressure that builds. It may feel like things around you become unstable for a moment. Old situations might intensify before they dissolve. Certain dynamics might push harder, as if testing whether the old version of you is still there. This is not a setback, it's a response. Because when the internal charge drops, the external pattern begins to lose its anchor. And as it starts to loosen, there can be a brief period where everything feels compressed, like something is about to give. And if you don't understand this stage, it's easy to misinterpret it. You might think things are getting worse. You might feel tempted to go back to your old reactions just to regain a sense of control or familiarity. But that would reconnect the circuit you just started to break. So stay with the cut, stay with the neutrality, even when it feels unfamiliar. Because what's happening next is not just emotional, it begins to reach into the physical layer of your life in a very real way. If you ignore this and keep sustaining your identity based on what hurt you, the situation moves beyond the emotional field and pressure becomes critical in matter itself. The field around you enters a real collapse. Chronic illnesses appear out of nowhere. The flow of money suddenly dries up and doors slam shut brutally. The universe begins to squeeze you to the limit because your current physical structure was not designed to carry the atomic weight of a decade ago into the present moment. At first, this doesn't look like a system. It looks like bad luck, a phase, a sequence of unfortunate events that don't seem connected. But if you slow down and observe carefully, there's a pattern forming beneath the surface. The same kind of stress keeps showing up in different forms. The same emotional tone repeats, even when the circumstances change. The same friction appears, no matter how much effort you put into moving forward. It's as if life is narrowing around you, reducing your options, increasing the pressure, forcing something to the surface. This is not punishment, it's compression. When an internal pattern remains active for too long without interruption, it doesn't stay contained in your thoughts or emotions. It begins to organize your behavior, then your decisions, then your environment. Over time, it shapes the structure of your life. So what you are experiencing externally is not separate from what you are holding internally. It's the physical extension of it. And here's the difficult part to accept. The longer that pattern runs, the denser it becomes. It's no longer just a memory or a feeling. It becomes embedded in your posture, your habits, your expectations. It influences what you notice, what you ignore, what you tolerate, and what you avoid. Without realizing it, you start building a life that matches the weight you carry. And dense patterns don't dissolve gently. They collapse. Think about moments in your life where everything seemed to fall apart at once. Not just one problem, but multiple areas breaking down simultaneously. Health, relationships, finances, direction, all under pressure at the same time. It feels overwhelming, sometimes even unfair. But what's actually happening is that the system can no longer sustain the mismatch between what you are carrying and what your current life is trying to become. The tension reaches a point where something has to give, and if the internal pattern is still being fed, the collapse happens in the external world. This is why people often say, everything was fine and then suddenly it wasn't. But it wasn't sudden. It was building quietly, layer by layer, reinforced by repeated emotional signals and unconscious reactions. The collapse is just the visible moment when the structure can't hold anymore. And here's where many people misinterpret what's happening. They try to fix the outer situation directly. They focus on solving the financial problem, repairing the relationship, managing the symptoms. And while those actions can bring temporary relief, they don't address the underlying signal that created the structure in the first place. So even if one area improves, another one starts to tighten, because the source hasn't changed. This is also where fear increases. When your external world starts to destabilize, your system naturally wants to go back to what feels known. Even if that known is painful, it still feels more predictable than uncertainty. So you return to old reactions, old thoughts, old emotional patterns, and without realizing it, you reinforce the very structure that is collapsing. It becomes a loop of pressure and reaction. But if you stay with what you started, if you continue cutting the emotional charge instead of feeding it, something different begins to happen. The collapse still occurs, but it changes its direction. Instead of breaking you, it begins to break the pattern. Instead of closing your life, it starts clearing what no longer fits. At first, this can feel just as intense. There may still be discomfort. There may still be instability. But there is a subtle difference. The pressure is no longer building in the same way. It's releasing. And that release creates space. Not immediately comfortable space, not fully defined space, but space that wasn't there before. This is the moment where everything you've been taught can become confusing. Because when things start to fall apart, the instinct is to go back, to repair, to hold on, to make sense of it through the lens of your past. But what if that instinct is exactly what keeps the structure in place? What if trying to fix everything is just another way of holding on to the same identity that created the pressure? Because if the collapse is not the problem, but the result, then the real question is no longer how to rebuild what's breaking. It's whether you're willing to stop rebuilding the same version of yourself that keeps producing it. And here is where everything you've been taught falls apart. Your whole life, you were told to dig into your past, revisit your pain, and heal every piece of your story in order to evolve. That's a lie. Keeping your focus on the wound is the exact mechanism that keeps the trauma collapsing and bleeding in the field of your experience. True liberation doesn't come from fixing the version of you that was broken. The system doesn't require you to heal. It requires something far more subversive. Because the moment you define yourself as someone who needs to be fixed, you lock yourself into a subtle contract. A contract where there is always something wrong, something incomplete, something that needs more time, more analysis, more effort. It sounds productive, but it quietly keeps you in the same position, looking backward, measuring yourself against what happened, and trying to repair an identity that only exists because you keep revisiting it. You were never meant to carry your past like a project, and yet that's what most people are doing, constantly adjusting, improving, refining, trying to become a better version of the person shaped by their wounds. But no matter how much you improve that version, it is still built on the same foundation. It's like renovating a house that sits on unstable ground. You can paint the walls, change the structure, decorate every room, but the base hasn't changed. Sooner or later, the cracks return. This is why the idea of fixing yourself feels endless. There is always another layer, another memory, another pattern to work on. And the more you search, the more you find. Not because you're broken, but because your attention is trained to scan for what needs repair. Attention amplifies. Where you look, things grow. So if your focus is constantly on what's wrong with you, your system becomes highly efficient at producing more evidence of it. Not to harm you, but to stay consistent with where your energy is directed. And over time, this creates a very refined identity. The one who is healing, the one who is working on themselves, the one who understands their pain deeply. It can even feel like progress. You become more aware, more articulate, more conscious of your patterns. But awareness alone doesn't dissolve the pattern if it's still emotionally charged. You can describe your wound perfectly and still live inside it. That's the illusion. You think you're moving forward because you understand more, but your body is still carrying the same signal. And as long as that signal is active, your external life continues to organize around it. So the system doesn't respond to how well you explain your past. It responds to whether you are still embodying it. And this is where the shift becomes uncomfortable. Because if you stop trying to fix yourself, something else is required from you. Something that feels almost unacceptable at first. You have to stop returning to the identity that was built around the wound. Not improve it, not heal it piece by piece, leave it. Completely. This doesn't mean denying that something happened. It doesn't mean pretending you were never affected. It means you stop using that experience as a reference point for who you are now. No more measuring your reactions through it. No more explaining your limits through it. No more reinforcing it through repeated attention. And this is where resistance shows up in a very strong way. Because without that story, without that ongoing process of fixing, there is a kind of emptiness, a gap, a space where your familiar identity used to be. And your mind will try to fill that space quickly. It will tell you that you're avoiding something, that you're skipping steps, that you're not doing the real work. But look closely. Those thoughts are just another way of pulling you back into the same loop, the same structure, the same version of you that always needs to be repaired. So instead of following that impulse, you stay with the space. You allow yourself to not define who you are through what hurt you. You allow the silence where the story used to repeat. And at first, that silence can feel disorienting, because you're no longer anchored to the past, but you haven't fully stabilized in something new yet. This is the edge. And most people don't stay here long enough. They rush back to what's familiar, even if it's painful, because at least it feels like something solid. But if you remain in this space, without grabbing the old identity again, something deeper begins to shift. Not in your thoughts, but in your sense of self. Because what starts to fade is not just the pain, but the entire structure that required you to keep fixing it. The only way to unlock the gears is to abandon the story completely. Drop it. You may have been 100% right about the injustice you suffered, but the real question is, do you want to hold on to the trophy of being a justified victim, or do you want the key to your life in your hands? Being right keeps you in the same frequency as the problem. When you let your painful biography fall into oblivion and refuse to use it as an excuse, the matrix loses control over your data. This is not about denying truth. What happened to you may have been unfair, real, and deeply impactful. But the system you are living in does not organize itself based on fairness. It organizes itself based on signals. And your biography, especially the painful parts of it, has become a script that keeps sending the same signal over and over again. Every time you remember who you were in that moment, every time you reinforce what was done to you, every time you explain your present through your past, you are reactivating that script, not just mentally but biologically and behaviorally, and slowly, without noticing, your life starts to orbit around that identity. You become the person who went through that, the one who was hurt that way, the one who had to survive that specific story. And even if you grow, even if you evolve in other areas, that core narrative remains untouched. Like a central file your system keeps referencing. So when we talk about letting go, we are not talking about forgetting details. We are talking about removing authority from that story, taking away its role as the foundation of who you are. Because as long as your identity is anchored in that biography, your future is limited to variations of it. It may look different on the surface, different people, different environments, different circumstances, but the emotional structure remains the same, and that structure quietly shapes your decisions. What you trust, what you avoid, what you expect, what you tolerate. It filters reality before you even have a chance to respond consciously. So dropping the story is not a poetic idea, it's a functional shift. It means that when your mind reaches for that old explanation, you don't pick it up. When a situation feels familiar in a negative way, you don't immediately connect it to your past. When you feel the urge to justify your current state through what happened before, you stop. Not by force, but by refusal. You simply don't go there. And at first, this can feel almost wrong, because that story has been your reference point for so long. It has explained your reactions. It has given context to your emotions. It has even protected you in certain ways. So letting it go can feel like losing part of yourself. But look closely. What you are losing is not yourself. It's the version of you that was organized around that experience. And without that structure, something unfamiliar begins to emerge. You start responding to life without filtering everything through the past. You start seeing situations more directly, without attaching old meanings to them. You begin to notice that not everything is a repetition. Some things are actually new, but you couldn't see them before because your biography kept translating everything into something familiar. This is where your perception starts to open. But there's a tension here, because even as this new space appears, there is still a pull backward, a subtle voice reminding you of who you were, of what happened, of why you should be careful, guarded, or limited. And that voice can sound convincing, not emotional this time, but logical. It will tell you that your past is important, that it shaped you, that you shouldn't ignore it. And in a way, that's true. But what it doesn't tell you is that continuing to use it as a reference keeps you tied to it. So the real shift is not about arguing with that voice, it's about no longer needing it. You don't fight your biography, you outgrow its relevance. And when you do, something very precise happens. The system loses its main point of reference for you. Because up until now, your patterns, your reactions, your identity, they were all predictable. They followed a script. They could be tracked, anticipated, repeated. But without that central story, that predictability starts to break. You become less readable, less tied to the past, less bound to the same outcomes. And this is where things begin to feel unstable in a different way. Not because something is wrong, but because you are no longer anchored to what was familiar. There is a gap forming between who you were and what you are becoming. And inside that gap, there is no clear identity yet, no solid definition, just space. And for many people, this is the most uncomfortable part of the entire process. But I need to be brutally honest with you. The exact moment you decide to let go of that story, a paralyzing fear will hit you. Your mind will scream in panic. If I am not my pain, if I am not that warrior who survived that battle, then who am I? Your ego is terrified of being no one. The existential pressure is so intense that most people panic and put their old chains back on. But you won't retreat. Endure this silence. Because what you are stepping into is not just change, it's disconnection from everything that used to define you. For a long time, your identity was built like a structure with clear edges. It had a past, a meaning, a narrative that explained your reactions and gave you a sense of continuity. Even if that identity was heavy, it was stable. It told you who you were. Now suddenly that structure is gone, and what remains feels like open space with no walls. At first, this can feel like confusion. You might notice yourself reacting less in situations where you used to feel triggered. Conversations that once pulled strong emotions now feel distant. Things that used to define you no longer carry the same weight. And instead of relief, there's a strange emptiness, almost like something is missing. This is where many people misinterpret what's happening. They think they've lost something important. They think they've become numb, disconnected, or indifferent. So they go back to their old story, just to feel something familiar again. But this is not numbness. This is neutrality. And neutrality feels unfamiliar because your system is used to intensity. It's used to emotional highs and lows, to strong reactions, to patterns that confirm your identity. Without that, everything feels quiet, too quiet. Your mind doesn't like that. It wants definition. It wants something to hold on to. So it starts searching for labels, for explanations, for ways to rebuild a sense of self as quickly as possible. It might try to recreate the old identity in a softer form. It might tell you to at least keep the lesson. It might even convince you that completely letting go is dangerous, that you'll lose your direction or your sense of meaning. But look carefully. This is just the old system trying to reassemble itself, because without your story, it has nothing to organize around. So it creates pressure, not physical pressure, but psychological tension. A subtle discomfort that pushes you to define yourself again, to choose something familiar, to anchor back into a known version of you. And this is the moment that matters most, because if you give in to that pressure, even slightly, you start rebuilding the same structure you just left. But if you stay, if you allow the silence, if you resist the urge to immediately become someone again, something deeper begins to stabilize. At first, it's almost unnoticeable. A sense of space that doesn't feel threatening anymore. A quiet presence that doesn't need constant explanation. A way of existing that is not tied to reacting, proving, or defending. You're still here, fully aware, but not defined by anything that came before. And that's what makes it feel so unfamiliar. You've never experienced yourself without reference points, without a story, without a past constantly informing your present. So your system interprets this as being no one. But that's not accurate. You're not becoming no one, you're becoming unbound. And there's a big difference, because no one sounds like absence, like emptiness, like loss. But what's actually happening is the removal of limitations that used to define you. You're no longer compressed into a fixed identity. You're no longer predictable in the same ways. You're no longer reacting from a stored script. And that creates a kind of openness that your mind doesn't know how to measure yet. So it calls it fear. It calls it uncertainty. It calls it danger. But if you stay with it a little longer without labeling it, something shifts. The fear begins to lose intensity. The silence becomes less threatening. And within that space, a different kind of stability starts to emerge, not based on who you were, but on something more immediate, something that doesn't need a story to exist. And this is the threshold, the point where most people turn back, and where a few continue forward, not because they feel ready, but because they stop needing to feel ready. Because beyond this point, what you are stepping into is not just the absence of your past, but a completely different state of being that operates by another set of rules. Because this terrifying void is not the end of you. Physics calls this state the zero-point field. It is the state of pure potential. By agreeing to be no one tied to yesterday, you permanently cut the tracking signal the system had on you. The patterns of repetition and limitation can no longer locate you. The person who needed to live that cycle simply no longer exists. You become invisible. But invisibility doesn't feel the way you expect. It doesn't feel like power at first. It feels like stillness, like nothing is pulling you in any direction. No strong emotional waves, No urgent thoughts trying to define what comes next. Just a quiet, neutral presence that doesn't react the way it used to. And your mind will try to interrupt this. It will look for something to attach to, some problem to solve, some identity to rebuild, some familiar emotion to bring back. Because it has been trained to operate through contrast, through tension, through constant movement between past and future. Neutrality removes that movement. So for a moment, it can feel like you're disconnected from life itself. But look closer. You're not disconnected. You're no longer entangled. There's a difference between being absent and being free. Before, your attention was constantly being pulled by emotional charges tied to your past. Now, without that charge, your attention becomes still. It's not being dragged anywhere. It's available, and that availability is where something new begins. Because when you are not projecting your past into the present, you start to perceive reality differently. Not through filters, not through expectations, but more directly. Small details become clearer. Situations feel less loaded. Decisions feel less forced. There is space between stimulus and response, and in that space you are no longer automatic. This is what neutrality actually gives you. Not emptiness, but precision. You begin to notice how much of your previous life was driven by reaction. Quick interpretations, immediate emotional responses, subtle assumptions based on old patterns, and without those, something changes in how you move through the world. You pause more, you observe more, you react less. And from the outside, this might look like nothing is happening. But internally, something very real is reorganizing. Your system is recalibrating. Without the constant flood of familiar chemistry, your body starts to settle into a different baseline. Your nervous system becomes less reactive. Your thoughts slow down. Your attention stabilizes, and this creates coherence. Not forced, not practiced, just the natural result of no longer being pulled in multiple directions by unresolved signals. But here's something important to see, because this is where self-deception can quietly enter. You might start to think you've arrived, that this calm, neutral state is the final point, and without noticing you create a new identity, the one who is now above it, the one who is at peace, the one who has transcended. That may sound harmless, but it's the same pattern in a different form. It's the mind trying to turn a living state into a fixed definition. So stay alert. Neutrality is not something you own, it's something you allow. The moment you try to define it, hold onto it, or turn it into a label, you begin to move away from it because you're reintroducing structure where there was openness. So instead of claiming it, you stay with it. You let it remain simple. No story, no identity, no need to explain what you are becoming. And as you remain in this state, something subtle starts to happen around you. Not inside, around. Situations begin to shift in ways that don't follow your old patterns. Interactions feel different. Opportunities appear where there used to be resistance. Timing starts to feel less forced. It's not dramatic at first. It's almost easy to miss. But there's a new kind of alignment forming, one that is not based on who you were, but on the absence of that past signal. And because of that, what begins to emerge is not a repetition of your history. It's something unlinked to it, something that doesn't match your old expectations. And this is where you need to remain steady. Because as these new possibilities start to appear, the system will do something very specific. It will check if you are truly no longer the same person. As soon as this neutrality takes over, coincidences that logic cannot explain begin knocking on your door. But stay alert. The system will run one final check in the coming days. Someone from your past may reappear, or an identical financial problem may arise out of nowhere. Do not react. It's just the echo of the system testing whether you still respond to old barcodes. Just give a silent smile. Without the weight of the past holding the handle, your new physical reality collapses instantly into place. This moment is subtle, but it is decisive, because what returns will look familiar, almost too familiar. The same tone of voice, the same type of message, the same pressure, dressed in slightly different details. And if you're not attentive, your body will recognize it before your mind does. You might feel a quick contraction, a pull to respond the old way, a thought that says, "Here we go again." That's the test, not to challenge you, but to reveal you. Because now, for the first time, you're not inside the pattern. You're facing it from the outside. And that changes everything. Before, you didn't have a choice. The reaction was automatic. The emotion came first, and your awareness followed. Now, awareness comes first, and the reaction is optional. But don't expect this to feel comfortable. The system is presenting you with a perfect mirror of who you used to be. It's inviting you, quietly, almost politely, to step back into that version. And it will feel convincing. It may even feel justified. You might think, this situation requires a response, or this is different, I need to act. But look deeper. Is it really different? Or is it just familiar enough to trigger the old pattern? This is where honesty matters more than effort, because the system doesn't measure what you say or what you intend. It reads your state. If your body tightens, if your emotions spike, if your thoughts start repeating the old narrative, then the signal is still active. And if the signal is still active, the pattern continues. So when this moment arrives, your power is not in doing more. It's in not returning. You stay still inside. You observe what's happening without attaching to it. You let the situation exist without turning it into a personal story. And most importantly, you don't rush to resolve it from the same place you used to. This doesn't mean you become passive or disconnected. It means your response, if there is one, comes from a different state. Not from memory, not from habit, not from emotional residue. From clarity. And clarity is quiet. It doesn't need urgency. It doesn't need to prove anything. It simply sees what is in front of it, without mixing it with what has already passed. If you can remain in that state, even for a few seconds longer than before, something breaks. Not outside, inside the pattern. Because the loop depends on your participation. Without your reaction, it has no continuation. Without your emotional charge, it has no fuel. And what you'll notice next is almost strange in its simplicity. The situation begins to lose intensity. What felt heavy starts to feel neutral. What seemed urgent starts to slow down. Sometimes it resolves on its own. Sometimes it fades without confrontation. Sometimes it reveals that it was never as solid as it appeared. This is the moment where many people doubt what's happening. They expect a dramatic shift, a clear confirmation, something undeniable. But instead, it can feel quiet, almost ordinary. And that's the point. Because the old system was built on intensity, the new one operates on alignment. No force, no struggle, no repetition, just a clean response to what is actually present. And if you pass this test, not perfectly but consciously, you'll notice that something doesn't come back this time. That familiar loop doesn't restart. That emotional pattern doesn't rebuild. That version of you doesn't reappear in the same way. It's not that the world has changed completely. It's that your connection to the old version of it has been cut. And without that connection, the system has nothing to lock onto. You are no longer broadcasting the signal it was designed to track. So it stops trying. And in that absence of repetition, something new begins to organize itself. Not as a reaction to your past, but as a reflection of your current state. Quietly, precisely, without asking for your permission. Because now, for the first time, there is no interference between who you are and what begins to take shape in front of you. The exit door of the system never needed to be broken open. It has always been wide open. The problem is that your two hands were too busy holding tightly onto the stones of your own biography to turn the handle. Whoever drops this past history unlocks the system's only exit door. Leave your baggage on the ground of the third dimension and let the system keep the ashes of who you used to be. If you are letting go of the ghost of your story today, to walk through that door, type in the comments so we know, my hands are empty. This is not about becoming someone new. It's about no longer carrying what was never meant to define you forever. When the weight drops, movement returns. When the signal clears, life responds differently. Stay aware in the next few days. This is where everything stabilizes. If this spoke to you, subscribe and watch one of the videos on your screen right now. Keep going.